The United Arab Emirates has confirmed hiring a company headed by Erik Prince, the billionaire founder of Blackwater. According to the New York Times, the UAE secretly signed a $529 million contract with Prince's new company, Reflex Responses, or R2, to put together an 800-member battalion of mercenaries. Documents show the force is intended to conduct special operations missions inside and outside the country, defend oil pipelines and skyscrapers from attacks, and put down internal revolts. The troops could be deployed if foreign guest workers stage revolts in labor camps, or if the UAE regime were challenged by pro-democracy protests like those sweeping the Arab world. One contract document describes, quote, crowd control operations, where the crowd is not armed with firearms but does pose a risk using improvised weapons, clubs and stones. The UAE is a close ally with the United States, and it appears the deal has received the Obama administration's support. One U.S. official told the Times, quote, the Gulf countries and the UAE in particular don't have a lot of military experience. It would make sense if they looked outside their borders for help. They might want to show that they are not to be messed with. News of the deal also comes just weeks after the UAE's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan visited President Barack Obama at the White House late last month. A White House statement said Obama and the Crown Prince would discuss, quote, the strong ties between the United States and UAE and our common strategic interests in the region. A number of U.S. citizens, including former Blackwater employees, have occupied senior positions in the operation. Legal experts have questioned whether those involved might be breaking federal laws prohibiting U.S. citizens from training foreign troops if they did not secure a license from the U.S. Department of State. The force is reportedly made up of Colombians, South Africans, and other foreign troops. Prince reportedly has a strict rule against hiring any Muslims because he's worried they could not be counted on to kill fellow Muslims. Prince himself now lives in the United Arab Emirates after moving there last year under a cloud of legal controversy here in the United States. The UAE deal is the first to emerge publicly since Prince sold Blackwater and suggested he would leave the private military business behind. For more, we're joined by independent journalist, Democracy Now! Correspondent, Nation writer Jeremy Scahill, author of the award-winning bestseller Blackwater, The Rise of the World's Most Powerful Mercenary Army. Jeremy was the first journalist to report on Prince's move to the United Arab Emirates 2 months before it was publicly confirmed. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Jeremy. Talk about the significance of this mercenary army that Prince is setting up for the UAE.
Well, when Erik Prince decided to move to the United Arab Emirates, he gave an interview to a former CIA employee in Vanity Fair, in which he said that he was going to be leaving the soldier of fortune business and said he wanted to go and teach high school. And he said, you know, I'll teach history. Even Indiana Jones was a teacher. Well, it's true that Indiana Jones was a teacher, but he also was an anti-mercenary. And in fact, in a famous scene in the movie Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark, his arch nemesis, Belack, who's working for the Nazis, accuses Indiana Jones of giving a bad name to mercenaries. So Erik Prince, rather than pursuing that path, has actually pursued the path of the mercenary. And when he moved to the United Arab Emirates, he said he did so because it was a free society and a country that respected the free market. Well, it didn't take long for him to get down to business with the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi and essentially hatched a plot to build up a mercenary army within the borders of the UAE, relying on labor from Colombia. Blackwater has a long history of working with Colombians. In fact, Blackwater paid Colombians $34 a day to operate in Iraq, and when the Colombians protested their payments, saying that they were getting less than the Bulgarians or the others that were working for Blackwater, the white soldiers, Blackwater threatened them, according to the Colombians, and wouldn't give them their passports back and said, you know, we're just going to release you onto the streets of Baghdad. And eventually the Colombians left, and they went and they assassinated the recruiter that had hired them for Blackwater. So it's ironic that Prince is using the Colombians. Now their pay has been increased to something like $150 a day. And the purpose of this force, as stated in the corporate documents and in the New York Times, is to deal primarily with the internal situation in the United Arab Emirates. Anyone who's been to the UAE knows that the economy is entirely fueled by migrant workers, people from the Philippines or from Pakistan or Bangladesh. And they live in these camps, and their conditions are not good, to say the least. So one of the concerns seemed to be that unrest could spread in those camps, and they didn't want to use UAE forces to quell those rebellions, but instead send in Erik Princes. The other thing, Amy, that I think is significant about this and we reported on this on Democracy Now! A year ago. Erik Prince gave a speech in late 2009 in which he talked about the rising influence of Iran in the Middle East and talking about how the Iranians were fanning the flames of Shia revolt. The regime in Bahrain has used the justification to crack down on protesters that they're agents of Iran or that they're being influenced or supported by Iran. And Prince essentially came up with a plan in front of this audience, a military audience, for the United States to advocate quietly sending in, this is in late 2009, quietly sending in private forces run by Americans or other Westerners into countries in that region with the express purpose of confronting Iranian influence. We now know that part of the UAE's arrangement with Erik Prince was aimed precisely at that. So this seems like it's been something in the works for some time. I spoke to Representative Jan Schakowsky earlier this week, who of course is on the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and has been the most ferocious congressional critic of Blackwater. And she's raising some very serious questions about whether Erik Prince obtained the necessary license to export these types of services to a foreign country. You have to have a license, what's called an ITAR license, from the State Department that says, hey, this former Navy SEAL who has had access to top secret information from the United States actually is authorized to conduct these services. Blackwater has been fined in the past millions and millions of dollars by the Justice Department for not obtaining those kinds of licenses. So it could be, if he didn't obtain these licenses, that he is actually breaking U.S. law in providing these services to the UAE.
And what about other U.S. Americans going over there?
I mean, look, the fact is that one of the major sources of income and one of the things that the UAE is becoming famous for is being a playground for the war game globally. Companies that service the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq have set up shop there because of the tax situation, because of its proximity to these war zones. And so you have massive, massive presence of the U.S. war industry in both Dubai and Abu Dhabi. And so for Erik Prince to set up shop there is no surprise. I mean, I know when I went to Afghanistan late last year, when you're in the airport in Dubai, it's journalists, rich Emiratis, or it's people in transit to Bangladesh or other countries, or it's the war industry. You see the 18-inch biceps, the wraparound sunglasses. I mean, it really is sort of a gateway to war and a good place to position yourself if you want to make a killing.
And the other Americans working with Prince in UAE?
Right. Well, there's a former FBI agent who actually, C.T. Chambers, who actually ran Blackwater's quote-unquote training operation in Afghanistan for a shell company that Blackwater set up called Paravan. And it seems as though this company was set up explicitly to keep the name Blackwater out of the contract bidding process. They won that contract, and Blackwater still has these contracts to train Afghan national police and military forces. That company came under an intense investigation by the Senate Armed Services Committee, led by Senator Carl Levin, exploring whether or not Blackwater and the massive war company Raytheon effectively conspired to win contracts for Blackwater while explicitly shielding or shrouding Blackwater's involvement in secrecy. Two members of that Blackwater force in Afghanistan were recently convicted of manslaughter stemming from the shooting deaths of two Afghan civilians. So the man who ran that program that's under intense congressional scrutiny right now, and Senator Levin has asked the Justice Department to investigate, is another key player in this Prince operation. He's supposedly making upwards of $300,000, but the contract is worth $100 million a year, and it started in June, and it's supposed to go through May of 2015.
We're talking to journalist Jeremy Scahill, who wrote the book Blackwater. We're all